The wind howled like a wounded animal across the barren plains, carrying with it the taste of dust and desolation. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a lonely coyote cried to the pale afternoon sun, and its echo came back thin and ghostly. Samuel Sam Crawford sat slumped on the cracked wooden bench of a mail wagon, a man with no more dreams left to lose. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his weary gray-blue eyes, and his hands were calloused from years of scratching at unyielding soil that never gave him anything but hunger in return. Sam wasn't yet 35, but life had carved deep lines into his face, the kind that come from working harder than any man should and watching too many things slip through his fingers. The fever had taken his wife, Mary, and their little boy, Thomas, 3 winters past. After that, the farm had gone to ruin. The bank had come calling, and Sam had walked away with nothing but a small satchel of clothes, a pocket knife, and the dull ache of memories he couldn't outrun. He had planned on drifting, maybe finding work as a ranch hand or breaking horses down in New Mexico territory. But fate, it seemed, had other ideas. When he stepped off that wagon into the half-dead town of Dry Creek, Arizona, the sheriff himself had been the one to tell him about the old McCready Ranch, sitting 30 miles north on the edge of the Badlands. Belongs to nobody now, Sheriff Bill Hargrove had said, leaning on the porch rail outside the saloon. McCready's packed up and vanished near on a year ago. No kinfolk, no heirs. Place is cursed, they say. Folks steer clear of it. Sam had just laughed. A hollow, joyless thing. Cursed land don't scare me, Sheriff. Ain't much out here that does anymore. The sheriff had squinted at him, chewing on a toothpick, and shrugged. You want it, farmer, it's yours. Papers are clean. But mark me, bad things happened on that spread. Well's been dry since the last owners disappeared. Some folks swear they still hear 'em calling from down there on moonless nights. Sam took the deed anyway. What did he have to lose? The journey out to the ranch was long and silent, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the dry rasp of wind over rock. Sam rode a borrowed mare named Daisy, a stubborn sorrel with more bones than meat on her, but she carried him well enough. The land grew wilder the further he went, stretches of brittle grass giving way to sand and stone, with nothing but the endless horizon ahead and a lone hawk circling high above. When he finally crested the last rise and looked down on the McCready Ranch, his breath caught in his throat. The place looked like it had been abandoned in a single night. The main house stood silent, windows black and hollow like dead eyes. The barn doors hung open, one side barely clinging to its hinge, swaying in the breeze. Fences had fallen, fields had gone to seed, and the corral was nothing but a mess of splintered rails. There was no sign of life, no cattle, no horses, not even a stray chicken scratching in the dust. And yet, there was something about the ranch that stirred a strange feeling deep inside him, a familiarity he couldn't explain, like he'd stood on this very ground once before in another life. He shook it off, blaming fatigue and hunger, and rode down the slope. Inside the house, the air was thick and stale, carrying the faintest hint of old lavender and something darker beneath, damp earth maybe, or mildew. Dust coated everything in a fine gray shroud, furniture, picture frames, a broken clock on the mantel frozen at 2:10. On the table lay a single plate with the remains of a meal still on it, untouched. The sight of it made the hair on the back of Sam's neck prickle. Whoever had lived here, they'd left in a hurry. In the corner stood a child's rocking horse, its faded paint cracked and peeling. He reached out to touch it, and the floorboards creaked beneath his weight. That's when he heard it. A soft, hollow sound drifting through the silence. A whisper. He froze, holding his breath, his ears straining. It came again, faint but unmistakable, carried up from somewhere beneath the house. Sam stepped back, boots scuffing against the worn rug, and his eyes darted to the window. Outside, not 20 yards away, stood the old stone well, half choked with weeds. By nightfall, Sam had built a small fire in the hearth, lit a lantern, and taken to pacing the front room. He told himself he wasn't spooked. He'd slept under open skies with coyotes howling in his ear, and this was no different. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching him, holding its breath. When he finally forced himself outside, the wind had died, and the desert lay silent, under a rising harvest moon. He walked to the well slowly, every step crunching over dry earth. The stones were cold beneath his fingertips as he leaned over the edge and peered into the darkness below. "Hello?" His voice cracked slightly. "Anybody down there?" The only answer was silence. He lowered the lantern by its rope, watching the golden glow descend into the black. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, as the lantern reached near the bottom, the light caught something glinting beneath a shallow pool of water. Something small, metallic, and oddly delicate. Sam bit his lip, tied the rope around his waist and climbed carefully down. Boots scraping against damp stones, the air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of wet earth. When he reached the bottom, he crouched and reached into the water. His fingers closed around a tiny, ornate locket, tarnished but intact. He opened it gently. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman with auburn hair and green eyes, a beauty frozen in time, and beside her a tiny sketch of a baby wrapped in a quilt. On the back of the locket, barely legible beneath years of wear, were the words, "To Clara, for always." Sam stared at the name, his heart pounding. Clara McCready, the woman who vanished. That night, Sam didn't sleep. He sat by the fire with the locket in his palm, turning it over and over while the desert whispered outside. Questions gnawed at him. Why had the McCreadys left everything behind? Why had this locket, why so precious, so personal, ended up at the bottom of a well? Somewhere deep in the house, a shutter banged loose, making him jump. He laughed bitterly at himself. Then, just as he started to relax, a soft voice drifted through the darkness. It came from the direction of the well. "Samuel." He froze, breath caught in his chest. Nobody knew his name here. The dawn broke cold and pale over the forsaken McCready ranch, washing the land in a thin veil of gold that made every shadow seem longer, every silence heavier. Samuel "Sam" Crawford had spent most of the night awake, sitting by the fire, staring at the tiny locket he'd pulled from the depths of the well. The whispers that had called his name still lingered in his ears like a phantom echo, though he'd heard them only once. Sleep had been impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the auburn-haired woman in the miniature portrait and the soft bundle of the baby beside her. Clara McCready, the name etched faintly into the back of the locket, haunted him now, though he'd never met her. He could almost feel her presence in the house, like the faint trace of lavender in the dust-thick air, as if she were just beyond reach, watching him, waiting. Outside, the wind had stilled, but the land felt no less restless. The silence was unnatural, too deep, too complete, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Sam strapped on his boots, slid the locket into his pocket, and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath his weight. In the distance, the empty corral leaned crooked under the weight of neglect, and the barn door flapped once, slow and hollow, before the morning breeze died again. He had planned to ride into town that day for supplies, but something made him pause at the threshold. His eyes drifted toward the well. Even in daylight, it seemed darker than it should have been. The letter an hour later, Sam reached Dry Creek, the town's single dusty street lined with low, weathered buildings whose paint had long surrendered to sun and wind. Horses stood tethered lazily outside the saloon, their tails flicking at invisible flies. A few locals loitered on porches, squinting at him from beneath broad-brimmed hats. Inside the general store, the air smelled of molasses and tobacco. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Agnes Colburn, a stout woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The new fool took the McCready place," she said, barely glancing up from the ledger she was scribbling in. "I took it," Sam admitted. "I don't know about fool." She closed the ledger with a snap. "You'll find out soon enough." As she filled his modest order, flour, coffee, salt pork, a coil of rope, Sam caught her watching him in the reflection of the glass jars lining the shelf. Finally she spoke, softer this time. "You best steer clear of that well." He stilled. "You heard something?" "I heard plenty," she said, lowering her voice to a near whisper. Folks say Clara McCready's spirit calls to men, makes them see things that ain't there, drives them mad till they throw themselves in. Sam said nothing. He gathered his supplies, nodded his thanks, and turned to leave. That's when Mrs. Colburn called out again. "Oh, near forgot. You got a letter waitin'." He frowned. "A letter? Arrived on the noon stage yesterday. Name's yours." She handed him an envelope, the paper creased but clean, his name written in delicate looping script. Mr. Samuel Crawford. He stepped outside into the sunlight and opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. The letter smelled faintly of pressed flowers. "Dear Mr. Crawford, my name is Eliza Whitaker. I have been corresponding with the agency in St. Louis regarding the arrangement we discussed. A respectable marriage to a man of good character, seeking partnership on the frontier. I arrive on the Friday stage. I pray this letter reaches you before then. Sincerely, Eliza Whitaker." Sam stared at the page until the ink blurred. Months ago, in a moment of weakness and loneliness, he'd sent a single letter to a mail-order bride agency, half hoping, half dreading the idea of a stranger's company. He'd never expected an answer, and now in less than 3 days a woman he'd never met was coming to marry him. Arrival Friday came fast. Sam stood outside the tiny Dry Creek station, hat in hand, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The stagecoach rumbled down the street, a cloud of dust rising behind it, and came to a squealing stop. When the door swung open, she stepped down. Eliza Whitaker. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 22, 23, with dark hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet, traveling dress dusted from the long ride, and eyes the color of warm honey that scanned the street with a quiet, guarded curiosity. When her gaze finally found his, something in his chest shifted. "Mr. Crawford?" she asked softly. He cleared his throat. "Sam," he said. "Just Sam." For a moment they stood there, two strangers bound by paper and promises neither fully understood. The ranch whispers. By late afternoon they reached the ranch. Eliza's expression was unreadable as she took in the sagging fences, the barn half collapsed and the house that seemed to crouch under the weight of its own silence. "It's quiet," she murmured. "Too quiet," he admitted before he could stop himself. They unpacked her things, shared a simple supper, and sat across from each other by the fire, the silence stretching long and strange between them. Sam wasn't a man of easy words, and Eliza didn't press him. Instead, she studied the locket he turned absently in his hands. "Who's that?" she asked finally. "Clara McCready," he said. "Found it in the well." Her brow furrowed. "The woman who lived here before?" "Vanished," he said simply. Her husband, their child. Folks say the land's cursed." Eliza glanced toward the window where the well stood in the pale light of a rising moon. That night, long after Eliza had gone to bed, Sam woke to the sound of distant weeping. He rose slowly, barefoot on cold floorboards, and followed the sound, outside. The well stood silent under the stars, but as he drew near, the air shifted, colder, heavier, as though the night itself were holding its breath. Then he heard it again, a woman's voice, faint, broken, calling for help. The outlaw, Next morning, while fixing the corral fence, Sam heard hooves approaching fast. He turned just in time to see a tall rider swing down from a black horse. Lean frame, dark eyes, a smirk that didn't reach them. "Name's Jesse Morgan," the stranger said, dusting off his duster coat. "Folks around here call me Blackjack." Sam frowned. "What do you want?" "That ranch." Sam straightened, hand hovering near the hammer at his belt. "It's mine now," Blackjack smiled, slow and dangerous. "Maybe, but you're digging where you shouldn't be. There's something buried on this land, farmer, and it ain't yours." Before Sam could reply, Blackjack swung into the saddle and tipped his hat. "Best stay out of that well," he called over his shoulder, "or it'll swallow you whole, like it did the McCreadys." That night, Eliza sat by the fire, fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "Sam," she whispered, "what have you gotten us into?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down, He already knew. The well wasn't empty, and whatever was buried beneath the ranch, someone was willing to kill for it. The sun bled slowly into the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and ember. Yet, on the land surrounding the forsaken McCready Ranch, there was no warmth, no comfort. The earth lay cracked and brittle, the wind carrying whispers of old secrets buried beneath sand and stone. Samuel Sam Crawford stood near the well, boots sunk into dry earth, staring at the dark circle that seemed to drink in the last of the evening light. It had been 3 days since Jesse Blackjack Morgan rode up to the ranch with his warning. 3 days since Sam first heard the soft, broken sobs drifting from the depths below. He hadn't slept well since. Beside him, Eliza Whitaker knelt near the garden plot, trying in vain to coax life from the stubborn soil. Her bonnet shielded her face, but Sam could still see the lines of worry tightening around her mouth. She'd been quieter since the Outlaws' visit, and though she tried to hide it, Sam sensed her fear like a taut wire between them. "We could leave," she said finally, her voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. Sam didn't look at her. "And go where?" "Anywhere but here," she murmured. "Some places carry death in the dirt, Sam. I can feel it." He clenched his jaw, staring at the well. "Maybe that's why I stayed," he said softly, almost to himself. "Maybe I ain't afraid of ghosts anymore." Whispers in the dark. That night the air hung heavy and strange, as if the desert itself had forgotten to breathe. Sam woke to the sound of something scratching against wood. For a moment he thought it was an animal, a fox maybe, or a loose shutter swaying in the wind. Then he heard it again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. This time it came from beneath the floorboards. He sat up, heart pounding, and reached for the rifle propped against the wall. The moonlight spilled through the window, turning the edges of the room silver and cold. He padded softly across the creaking floor, following the sound to the trapdoor that led down to the cellar. The scratching stopped. Sam swallowed hard, lifted the latch, and eased the door open. The lantern's glow trembled as he descended the narrow steps into the damp darkness below. The cellar smelled of earth and rot, the stone walls slick with moisture. At the far end, half hidden beneath a rotting sack of potatoes, lay a small wooden chest. Its lid bore deep gouges, as if something inside had once tried to claw its way out. Sam crouched, brushing away the dust, and found initials carved into the wood. C.M. Clara McCready. The lock had long rusted away, and when Sam pried the lid open, he found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, the paper yellowed and fragile with age. The first one he opened bore a shaky, hurried hand. "William's temper grows worse. He speaks of the gold again. I fear what he will do if he cannot find it. I hear the crying at night. But when I go to the well, there is nothing there." Sam's breath caught. Gold. He read another, his fingers trembling. "He thinks the Apache left their treasure beneath this land, that it lies buried where the old symbols mark the stones. He would kill to have it, Samuel. If you find this, please, forgive me." His name. She had written his name. But how? A stranger named Chaska. The next morning, a rider approached the ranch from the south. Sam stepped onto the porch, rifle at his side, watching as the man dismounted from a painted horse. He was Lakota. Tall, lean, his black hair braided with strips of rawhide. His buckskin shirt bore beadwork that caught the sunlight like scattered stars. He stood silent for a moment, scanning the house, the barn, and finally the well, before his dark eyes settled on Sam. "You're Crawford," he said in accented English. Sam nodded cautiously. "And you are?" "Chaska," the man replied simply. "I came because of the whispers." Eliza, standing behind Sam, stiffened. "You've heard them too?" Chaska's gaze drifted to the well. "Many seasons ago, this land belonged to my mother's people. They carved warnings on the stones to keep others away. The white men came anyway. They dug, they stole, and they cursed themselves." Sam frowned. You're saying there's gold down there? Chaska's expression darkened. Not gold worth dying for. Blood soaks this ground. Those who seek the treasure will find only death. Desert hunger. By the third week, the drought had worsened. The well's water had turned brackish, the taste sharp and metallic on their tongues. Eliza's garden withered to brittle stalks, and the few cattle Sam had managed to acquire bawled, weakly in the heat. One afternoon, as Sam drew water, his rope snagged on something below. When he hauled it up, a shard of carved stone broke the surface, slick with mud. Strange symbols were etched deep into its face, spirals, arrows, and markings he didn't recognize. Chaska studied it that evening, his fingers tracing the grooves, with reverence. "These mean death," he said finally. The old ones used symbols to bind the dead to the earth. Disturbing them was forbidden. Eliza shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. But why would anyone bury gold in a cursed place? Chaska looked up, his dark eyes unblinking. To keep it safe from men like Blackjack Morgan. The outlaw returns. It was past midnight when the ranch dogs began to bark. Sam stepped out onto the porch, rifle raised, just as torchlight flared at the edge of the property. 5 riders sat silhouetted against the moon, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. Blackjack's voice carried through the still night air. "Come out, farmer," he called lazily. "Time we had ourselves a talk." Sam leveled the rifle, his finger curling on the trigger. From the shadows, Blackjack laughed, low and cold. "You don't understand what you found, Crawford. But I do. And I aim to take it." Then, without another word, the riders melted back into the darkness, their threat hanging heavy in the air like the promise of a storm. That night, Eliza sat close to the fire, her hands trembling in her lap. "Sam," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of burning wood, "you can't fight them. We should leave while we still can." Sam stared into the flames, jaw set. "And run for the rest of our lives?" "No, Eliza. I won't." He reached into his pocket and drew out the locket, placing it gently in her hand. "This belonged to Clara," he said softly. "She didn't get to leave. Maybe it's time someone finished what she started." Eliza looked up at him then, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw trust in her eyes. Fragile, tentative, but real. The laughter beneath. Just before dawn, Sam returned to the well with the lantern. He lowered it again, letting the light sink deep into the shadows. For a moment there was nothing. Then faint and distant came the sound of a child's laughter. High and thin. Impossible. He staggered back, heart hammering. As the sound rose up through the stone throat of the well like a memory clawing its way to the surface, Eliza appeared behind him, drawn by his startled cry. "Sam?" she whispered. He turned slowly, his face pale in the half-light. "There's something down there?" he said hoarsely. "What is it?" Sam swallowed hard, staring into the dark. "I think," he said, voice breaking. "It's them." The sun rose red that morning, swollen and angry on the horizon, as though the desert itself was warning them of what was to come. The air carried a strange stillness, a silence so complete that even the cicadas held their tongues. Samuel "Sam" Crawford stood on the porch of the abandoned McCready Ranch, rifle in hand, watching heat waves shimmer over the empty fields. Beside him, Eliza Whitaker poured a tin cup of coffee, her hands trembling despite the warmth of the morning. 3 nights had passed since the sound of laughter rose up from the well. Sam hadn't spoken much since, and what little sleep he'd managed was restless, haunted by dreams he couldn't shake. Dreams of the missing McCreadys, of a woman with auburn hair, of a baby crying in the darkness beneath the earth. Beside the well, Chaska crouched low, tracing the carved stones with his fingertips, his dark braids falling over his shoulder. He'd spent hours studying the spirals and strange markings they'd unearthed, whispering softly in Lakota, as though speaking to spirits older than memory. Finally, he rose and met Sam's gaze. "These are not warnings," Chaska said, his voice low and measured. They are promises. Sam frowned. Promises of what? Chaska's gaze drifted to the horizon, where thunderclouds were gathering in the distance. That the dead do not sleep beneath this land. The journal later that afternoon, while Eliza prepared supper, Sam sat at the old oak table with Clara, Macready's hidden journal spread before him. He'd been reading it slowly, piecing together fragments of a life consumed by secrets and fear. The ink had faded with time, but her words still carried the weight of desperation. William says, "The treasure lies beneath the well. He believes the Apache left their gold to guard the spirits of their dead. He says the carvings are a map, but I fear they are a curse. We are being watched. I hear crying at night, and when I wake, the baby's cradle is empty." Sam set the journal down, his hands tightening into fists. Clara had known. She'd understood the danger, and somehow it had swallowed them whole. Eliza approached quietly, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sam," she whispered, "you don't have to carry this alone." He turned to her, his voice hoarse. "If we leave, Blackjack will follow us. If we stay, the land might kill us. Tell me, Eliza, which death do you want?" She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside him, her warm hand resting over his, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the silence between them was soft, not heavy, not haunted. Then the dogs began to bark. Blackjack Strike's Sam stepped onto the porch as dust rose, in the distance shimmering in the heat. Within minutes, 5 riders crested the hill, Jesse Blackjack Morgan at their head, his black hat casting a long shadow across his sharp, unshaven face. He rode slow, deliberate, his boots resting, easy in the stirrups, a predator at ease. His men fanned out behind him, rifles slung loosely, the sunlight flashing on the barrels. "Afternoon, Crawford," Blackjack drawled, tipping his hat. "Fine piece of land you got here. Shame about the history, though." Sam leveled his rifle, jaw tight. "You're trespassing." Blackjack smiled, lazy and cold. "You think a deed makes this place yours? That paper won't stop what's coming. There's something down there, farmer, and something worth more than you can imagine. Hand it over, and maybe I let you keep breathing." Before Sam could reply, Chaska stepped forward, his bow in hand, eyes dark with fury. "Leave this place," he said quietly. "It is not meant for men like you." Blackjack's smile widened. "And who decides that? You? The ghosts in your stories?" He leaned forward in the saddle, his gaze locking on Sam. "Listen to me, Crawford. You keep digging where you ain't supposed to, you'll end up just like the Macreadys." The tension hung thick in the air until Blackjack finally pulled, on his reins, turning his horse with deliberate ease. "You got till sundown tomorrow," he said over his shoulder. "After that, the land, and whatever's under it, is mine." Storm and silence. That evening, dark clouds rolled across the desert sky, heavy with the promise of rain. The wind howled through the broken fences, rattling loose shutters and slamming doors. Sam and Eliza hurried to secure the barn while Chaska tended to the frightened cattle. By nightfall, the storm broke. Rain lashed against the house, soaking the dry earth until it bled into mud. Lightning split the sky and thunder roared like cannon fire, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Then came the sound, low, hollow, and endless, from deep within the well. Eliza clutched Sam's arm, her voice trembling. "Please don't." But Sam stepped out into the downpour, boots sinking into the wet earth as he approached the well. Lantern in hand, he leaned over the stone lip, peering into the churning darkness below. This time, there was no laughter, no weeping, only voices, hundreds of them rising and falling like a tide. He staggered back, choking on his breath, as a flash of lightning lit the carved stones, and for an instant, he thought he saw faces etched into the spirals, their mouths open in silent screams. Behind him, thunder cracked, and the ground trembled beneath his boots. The well was collapsing, the cavern below, as the stones gave way. A rush of cold air exploded upward, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and bitter, like old blood. Sam grabbed Eliza and pulled her back just as the ground split, revealing a yawning black cavern beneath the ranch. Chaska fell to his knees at the edge, muttering prayers under his breath. Below, faint torchlight glimmered in the newly exposed depths. Sam's breath caught. Someone's been down there. Before anyone could move, a distant gunshot cracked from somewhere beyond the ridge. Then another. Blackjack Morgan had returned, and he wasn't alone. Blood on the horizon. By dawn, smoke curled from the far side of the property where Blackjack's men had set fire to the dry brush, cutting off their escape. The sun rose behind the black haze, staining the horizon crimson. Sam loaded his rifle with shaking hands, his jaw set hard. Chaska notched an arrow, his voice low and steady. They will come for the gold. Sam shook his head. Then we give him a fight instead. Eliza stepped forward, pale but unflinching. Sam, if they take you, they'll kill me too. He turned to her, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. The roar of the wind, the scent of smoke, and the quiet, desperate weight of unspoken feelings. I won't let them touch you, he whispered. And then, far across the property, the sound came. The pounding of hooves, the crack of rifles, and Jesse Morgan's cold, laughing voice carried on the wind. The battle for the McCready Ranch had begun. The morning came heavy and gray, the sun hidden behind a veil of low-hanging clouds. The air was thick with the bitter tang of smoke drifting across the horizon from where Blackjack Morgan's men had set fire to the dry brush the night before. Sam Crawford stood on the porch of the McCready Ranch, rifle resting across his arms, staring out at the haze that blurred the distant ridges. Somewhere out there, Jesse Blackjack Morgan was waiting. Every sound felt sharper that morning. The restless stamp of the horses in the corral, the creak of the windmill's broken vane, the nervous chatter of the starlings circling overhead. Even the silence seemed alive, thrumming like a drum beneath the skin of the world. Inside the house, Eliza Whitaker moved quietly, her skirts whispering against the worn wooden floors. She set a coffee pot on the stove with steady hands, but her pale face and downcast eyes betrayed her fear. Sam had tried to reassure her, but she wasn't blind. She'd seen the torches, the riders, the smoke. She knew, as he did, that Blackjack wasn't going to leave without blood. Chaska sat cross-legged, near the hearth, fletching arrows in deliberate silence. The Lakota tracker's face was unreadable, but his stillness carried a weight heavier than words. After a long while, he spoke without looking up. He will come with the dawn, he said simply. Sam nodded, his jaw tight. Then we'll be ready. The siege begins. They didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, the distant rumble of hooves carried through the smoky air, rolling across the plains like distant thunder. Sam stepped outside and squinted toward the horizon. Out of the shimmering heat came Blackjack Morgan, flanked by nearly a dozen riders. They moved slowly, deliberately, like wolves circling wounded prey. Sam's grip tightened on his rifle. Blackjack drew up his black stallion 100 yards from the porch, his long coat flaring in the wind. He sat in the saddle like a king surveying his domain, his grin cold and easy. "Mornin', farmer," he called, his voice carrying clear across the open space. "Last chance. Hand over what's in that well and maybe I'll leave you and the girl alive." Sam stepped forward, boots crunching on dry earth. "There's nothing down there worth dying for," he shouted back. Blackjack's grin widened. "Then why are you still here?" Behind him, his men fanned out, forming a loose semicircle around the ranch. Rifles glinted in the sunlight. Eliza appeared in the doorway, pale and rigid, her eyes fixed on Blackjack. Sam felt her fear like a second heartbeat beneath his own. He raised his rifle slowly, deliberately. "You set one boot on this land, Blackjack, and I'll put you in the ground." For a moment there was silence. Then Blackjack laughed, low, cold and certain. "Boys," he said without looking back, "burn it. Fire and lead." The first shot cracked the air like lightning, and the world erupted into chaos. Gunfire roared as Blackjack's men opened up from the ridge, their bullets ripping through the brittle fences and splintering porch posts. Sam dove for cover behind the water trough, returning fire with deadly precision. Chaska's arrows cut through the smoke, finding their marks with eerie silence. One rider fell from his horse before he even realized he'd been hit. Another clutched his side and tumbled into the dirt. But there were too many. Flames leapt high as two of Blackjack's men hurled torches into the barn. The dry hay caught instantly, and thick black smoke rolled across the yard, choking the air. The terrified horses screamed inside, their frantic whinnies piercing the roar of the fire. "Sam!" Eliza's voice cut through the chaos as she ran from the house, clutching a bucket of water. "They'll burn us out. Get back inside," he shouted, firing again. "Keep low." A bullet whined past her shoulder, splintering the doorframe as she dove back through the doorway. Chaska leapt onto the corral fence, loosing 3 arrows in rapid succession. 2 men fell. The third wheeled his horse and fled into the smoke. But then Blackjack moved. He spurred his stallion straight toward the porch, revolvers blazing. Bullets chewed through the railing, sending splinters flying. Sam barely had time to roll aside as Blackjack thundered past, wheeling around for another charge. The promise beneath. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, though it could only have been minutes. The heat from the burning barn drove them back toward the well, the one place Blackjack's men seemed reluctant to approach. Sam ducked behind a fallen beam, panting, sweat and soot streaking his face. Beside him, Chaska knelt, restringing his bow with trembling hands. "Why won't they come closer?" Sam gasped, glancing toward the well. Chaska's dark eyes met his, solemn and steady. "They fear what sleeps below," he said softly. Sam frowned, wiping blood from his temple. "You're saying the gold's real?" Chaska hesitated, his gaze fixed on the well. "Not gold. Something older." Before Sam could ask more, a scream tore through the smoke. Eliza's voice, sharp and terrified. He spun just in time to see her dragged from the house, Blackjack's arm clamped tight around her waist. "Enough games, Crawford," Blackjack bellowed, pressing the cold steel of his revolver against Eliza's temple. "You want her alive? Bring me what's down there. Now." Sam froze, every muscle locked tight, his rifle trembling in his hands. "Let her go," he growled. Blackjack's grin was all teeth. "Show me the treasure first." The descent Sam had no choice. He lowered his rifle slowly, set it on the ground, and stepped toward the well. "Sam, don't," Eliza whispered, tears streaking her soot-darkened cheeks. He didn't answer. With shaking hands, he tied the lantern to the rope and began lowering himself into the darkness. The heat and smoke faded with every foot he descended, replaced by a damp, cool stillness that raised goose flesh on his arms. When his boots splashed into shallow water at the bottom, he lifted the lantern high and froze. The cavern walls glimmered faintly in the golden light, slick with moisture and carved with symbols like the ones on the stone fragment he'd pulled up weeks before. But it wasn't the carvings that stole his breath. It was the bones, piles of them scattered across the chamber floor, human and animal alike, bleached pale with age. In the center lay a single stone altar, half buried in mud. On top rested an ornate cross of beaten gold, its surface etched with markings he couldn't read. Sam reached for it instinctively, and the whispering began again. The breaking point above him, a shot rang out. Sam jerked his head up in time to see Blackjack's body tumble backward from the well's edge, an arrow buried deep in his chest. Chaska's silhouette appeared against the smoky sky, bow still raised, but there was no time to breathe. No time to think. The ground beneath Sam's boots shuddered violently. Rocks splintered from the ceiling, splashing into the dark water around him. The walls trembled with a low, rumbling growl as though the earth itself had awakened. "Sam!" Eliza screamed from above. "Get out!" He lunged for the rope, clutching it tight, hauling himself upward as the cavern roared below. Dust and stones rained down, stinging his skin and filling his lungs. Halfway up, the rope jerked suddenly, pulling him sideways against the slick wall. Something cold had caught his ankle. He looked down, and his heart stopped. From beneath the tiao, black water, a pale hand had surfaced, skeletal and dripping, its fingers curling around his boot. Samuel Sam Crawford hung from the fraying rope, the weight of his body jerking against his burning palms as his boots kicked wildly in the damp air. Below him, the cavern glimmered faintly in the lantern light, its shallow pools reflecting 100 fractured shadows. The skeletal hand gripping his ankle was pale as moonlight, its bones sharp and cold, its grip unyielding as stone. Sam, Eliza's scream cut down from above, shrill and desperate, lost beneath the roar of shifting rock. The walls of the well trembled around him, raining pebbles and dust into his eyes. The cavern below groaned like some ancient sleeping thing disturbed. From slumber, Sam kicked hard, twisting violently until the slick, bony fingers slipped free. He lunged upward, hauling himself hand over hand up the rope, lungs burning, throat raw. The damp stone scraped his knuckles, tore his palms, but he didn't stop until strong hands caught his wrists and dragged him onto the trembling ground above. Eliza collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder, her body shaking with relief. Sam held her close, one arm braced around her waist, the other gripping the muddy earth like an anchor. "It's not just gold down there," he rasped, breathless. "It's worse than that. Blackjack's reckoning. Jesse, Blackjack Morgan, lay sprawled in the wet dirt a few feet away, an arrow buried deep in his chest. His once proud black stallion bolted into the distance, reins trailing, swallowed by the smoke-choked horizon. Chaska knelt over the dying outlaw, his expression unreadable. Blackjack's breath came in ragged gasps, his once sharp eyes dulled by blood loss. "You don't understand," he choked out, blood bubbling at his lips. "The cross, it's not just treasure. It's a key." Sam crouched beside him, dirt smeared across his face, his chest heaving. "A key to what?" Blackjack's cracked lips twisted into the faintest smile. "To everything." And with that, he exhaled one last rattling breath, his body going, still beneath the dark, churning sky. The wind carried the smoke from the burned-out barn across the yard, curling around Blackjack's lifeless form before sweeping him into silence. Sam stared down at him for a long moment, then reached into Blackjack's coat and pulled out a crumpled, sweat-stained map. It bore the same carved symbols as the stones beneath the well, the secret of the Golden Cross. Later that night, the three of them huddled inside the house, their faces lit only by the flicker of firelight. The storm had passed, but the world outside still carried the heavy quiet of things unresolved. Sam spread the map across the table, tracing the spirals and arrows with calloused fingertips. Beside him, Eliza clutched the locket he'd found in the well, her thumb brushing softly over the faded miniature portrait inside. Chaska stared into the flames, his voice low, almost reverent. "Long ago," he began, "this land was part of the Apache burial grounds. They buried their dead beneath the earth and placed guardians to protect them. The Golden Cross was not meant for men like us. It seals the cavern, binds the spirits below. But when the Macreadys came..." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Sam leaned forward, his voice rough. "They broke the seal." Chaska nodded slowly. "And the dead have been restless ever since." Eliza's hand trembled as she set the locket on the table. Then, that laughter, the voices. "The Macreadys," Chaska said softly. "Trapped beneath the earth, bound to the gold they disturbed. The choice." The next morning, Sam stood once more at the lip of the well, the rope coiled at his feet, the lantern flickering in his hand. Eliza clutched his arm, her voice tight with fear. "Sam, please. We don't owe them anything. Let it stay buried." He turned to her, his expression grim but gentle. "If we leave it, Eliza, others will come. More men like Blackjack. More death. It has to end here." Chaska stepped forward, holding the journal Sam had found weeks ago. He pressed it into Sam's chest. "If you go down," Chaska said quietly, You cannot come back until you make peace with what sleeps below. Sam nodded once, tightened the lantern strap around his wrist, and began his descent into the earth. The cavern of bones. The air grew colder as Sam lowered himself down, his boots scraping against the slick stone until he dropped into shallow water below. The lantern's glow danced across the chamber walls, revealing the same strange symbols etched into every surface, spiraling inward toward the golden cross. He stepped carefully among the scattered bones, his breath misting in the chill. The whispers rose again, soft and unbroken, like wind through dry grass. "Clara," he whispered, gripping the locket tightly in his hand. "I found your journal. I know what happened." The voices stilled. For the first time, there was silence in the cavern. Sam stepped forward, kneeling before the golden cross. He lifted it gently from the altar, the weight of it heavier than gold should be. As he set the locket beside it, the lantern's flame guttered violently, plunging the chamber into shadow. And then came the crying. High and thin, the unmistakable wail of a child echoing through the stone throat of the earth. Sam closed his eyes, his voice breaking as he spoke into the dark. "I forgive you." The crying faded. The air grew still. And for the first time since setting foot on the ranch, Sam felt the weight lift. Redemption. When Sam emerged from the well, pale and trembling, the dawn was breaking across the desert. A soft breeze carried the smell of rain, and the first rays of sunlight spilled over the burned ruins of the barn, gilding the land in quiet gold. Eliza rushed forward, throwing her arms around him, her tears warm against his soot-streaked skin. "It's over," she whispered. Sam held her close, his gaze drifting across the land that had cost so much blood. "No," he said softly, "it's just beginning." Together they rebuilt the ranch brick by brick, the three of them bound by what they'd survived. In time, travelers passing through Dry Creek would speak of a haven at the edge of the Badlands, a place where the lost could find shelter, where the weary could rest, and where a farmer, a mail-order bride, and a Lakota tracker built a new kind of family. But on quiet nights, when the wind swept low over the land, Sam would sometimes pause by the well, and in the hush between heartbeats, he could swear he heard a child's laughter, soft, distant, and finally at peace. The end.